Yeah, the local hunters were hunting, obviously, and so they were gifting us venison. Lately, we've been lucky enough to get a little bit of a grant, so we've been able to get beef. And, yeah, we're changing it up a bit, and it's like 20 weeks probably down the line, and, yeah, we're still going.
Awesome.
Yeah, congratulations on your work. And it's such a special thing to do, because everyone who does go through periods of hardship like this, the thing that, you come out of it with is that feeling of community and that sense of gratitude for the people who do step up to help you and do those things. And it's the people who do decide, we'll just do this, we'll make the soup happen, cool. and then put it into place. And, it's something that lots of people will comment on, that even in a terrible experience, it's that sense of connection that kind of sustains them.
Yeah, it's been really humbling because we hail from the East Valley, so it's been really humbling because me and my mother started it, and we've got we've probably got a core group of about 10 to 12 people each week, but lots of other people come on board.
That's awesome. Hey, thank you very much for that, and kia ora to you, Hayley Butcher, ending the panel there. Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei, 2 volunteer Muriwai firefighters killed in a mudslide didn't recognise the deadly warning signs. An independent investigation recommends better training. National's election promise to upsize plans for Dunedin Hospital. That means a bigger bill too. Dr. Shane Reti explains how it will pay. Sticking with health, hundreds of medical lab workers draw first blood in a pay dispute, with plans to walk off the job next week. 3 helicopter companies plead guilty to charges laid in the wake of the deadly Whakaari White Island eruption. And a DC-3 aeroplane grounded for almost 3 decades looks set to take off again.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Ahi Madie, good afternoon. I'm Evie Ashton. More than 1,000 properties around the country may have been issued fraudulent building consents. An engineer named as Jonathan Bow Hall of Kodiak Consulting is alleged to have completed and signed documents by using others' identities. Adam Burns reports.
A total of 42 councils may have been supplied faulty documents. These include producer statements assuring councils that a building design is up to code. Engineering New Zealand's Chief Executive Richard Templer says it is extremely disappointing to see allegations of such scale. He says he takes misrepresentation very seriously and will be engaging the police and other authorities in an investigation.
3 commercial helicopter tour operators have pleaded guilty at the 11th hour and will no longer go to trial over health and safety failings in the lead-up to the deadly Whakaari eruption in 2019. Volcanair, Kahu and Arius today entered guilty pleas to amended charges in the Auckland District Court and will be sentenced in August. That takes the number of defendants to face trial next week down to 6, but Judge Evangelist Thomas says WorkSafe will need time to adjust its case.
That creates some very real difficulties for the parties that still remain in that trial to be ready on Monday, because the landscape for trial is now far different than it was yesterday or 2 days ago.
The trial will now start on Tuesday instead of Monday. Fire and Emergency has failed to train its firefighters on identifying landslide risks. That's the key finding of an investigation into the death of 2 volunteers, Dave van Svanenberg and Craig Stevens, who were killed when a house slipped down a bank in Muriwai during Cyclone Gabrielle. FENZ Chief Executive Kerry Gregory says it's made 4 recommendations, including adding landslide awareness to its training program.
These actions won't change what happened to Dave and Craig. But as adverse events like Cyclone Gabrielle become more common and unpredictable, the steps we're taking will give a greater level of knowledge and training to keep our firefighters safer in these circumstances.
The Prime Minister is stressing New Zealand's independent foreign policy doesn't imply neutrality. Chris Hipkins this afternoon delivered his first major foreign policy speech as Prime Minister. Here's political reporter Katie Scotcher.
Mr Hipkins told an audience of diplomats and academics in Wellington that New Zealand's long-held approach to foreign affairs won't change under his leadership. But he said independence does not mean neutrality, and this country will chart its own course and make decisions that are in the national interest. Mr Hipkins said independence helps this country act as honest brokers and keeps it safer. He stressed the need for New Zealand to avoid polarisation as countries rush to take sides on a range of conflicts.
The National Party is promising to reverse service cuts to Dunedin's planned new hospital if it wins the election. The hospital has been plagued by delays and budget blowouts since Labour campaigned in 2017 on getting the project underway by the 2020 election. Beds, operating theatres and imaging services have been cut as a result. National's health spokesperson Shane Reti says his party will invest close to $30 million to reverse those cuts.
Today we're backing clinicians, we're backing people of the South, and we're giving them the tools to do the job that they need to do. 2 operating theatres, 23 beds and a PET scanner will help them achieve the outcomes that we all want for the people of the South.
The funding wouldn't reverse cuts to a non-clinical pavilion or a link bridge. To sport now, and Damien McKenzie concedes he's as surprised as anyone at being named ahead of Richie Mo'unga to start at first 5 in the All Blacks' first test of the year. New Zealand begin the Rugby Championship against Argentina in Mendoza on Sunday morning. Coach Ian Foster says the choice of McKenzie was made on form.
Stoked, probably didn't expect it at first. Obviously we got Rich and Bears have had a great year, and obviously had a bit of game time this year with the Chiefs, so looking forward to it. It's exciting being over here in Argentina too, and it's going to be an exciting challenge getting in that 10 jersey.
Chiefs wing Emoni Narawa will make his All Blacks debut while Mo'unga's in the reserves. The third Ashes test hangs in the balance heading into day 2 at Headingley. England will resume on 68 for 3 tonight after Australia were dismissed for 263 in their first innings. England fast bowler Mark Wood took 5 wickets in his first test this year, but he'll be looking to put his feet up, having spent a nervous time late on day 1 padded up on standby as night watchman.
I've come back in, all of a sudden the night watchman's cool again. Stokesy, he's done me bad there. I know, he was laughing something rotten up there when I was pacing around in the thing. My hands were so sweaty. Oh, awful.
England must win the test to keep the series alive. And Lydia Kos had a horror opening round at the US Open at Pebble Beach in California. She had a quadruple bogey on the par 3 fifth hole and eventually finished at 4 over par, 9 shots off the lead. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, Anthony Lowenstein on how Israel became such a successful arms and spyware manufacturer. His latest book is called The Palestine Laboratory. Bill Bailey, who, among other things, can imitate an armadillo, and the history of the occult and the esoteric in Aotearoa with Andrew Paul Wood. Ko Kim Hilo. Join me tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Saturday. From Northland to Bay of Plenty, including Auckland. Periods of rain or showers with some heavy falls. Thunderstorms possible for Northland tomorrow. From Waikato to Taranaki, including Taupo, cloud increasing and rain spreading south this afternoon and evening. Showers tomorrow. From Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Wellington, high cloud today. Rain from tonight with some heavy falls in the east. Whanganui and from Taihape to Kapiti, high cloud today, scattered rain tomorrow. Marlborough and from Nelson to Fiordland, cloudy periods, occasional rain from this evening. For the remaining South Island areas, fine, apart from some areas of low cloud or fog. Cloud increasing Saturday and occasional rain developing in Canterbury in the morning and some scattered rain affecting Otago from the afternoon. And Re Kohu, Chatham Islands, occasional showers today, partly cloudy tomorrow. It's 7 minutes past 5. I'll have traffic news and headlines for you at about 20 past 5.
Nā mihi Evie, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint Te Tēnei Rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Fire and Emergency is letting its people down. The assessment from the Firefighters Union following a report showing Fire and Emergency has failed to train its firefighters on identifying landslide risks. The report follows the death of 2 volunteer firefighters who died while trying to save people and homes as Cyclone Gabrielle tore through Muriwai. Emma Stanford reports.
Craig Stevens and Davins Wanneberg were buried under a landslide on February 13th. They were at a property on Motutara Road for less than 7 minutes when the earth slipped, bringing a house and dirt on top of them. Craig was rescued and taken to hospital, where he died 3 days later. Dave's body was recovered 35 hours after the earth came down.
Conditions were extremely difficult and challenging that night, and knowing 2 of our people were trapped was extremely tough for all of those who responded.
Not only volunteer firefighters, they were also well-known and well-respected members of the community.
In small communities, tragedies like this have a profound impact, and our thoughts are with all of them too.
Fire and Emergency's investigation shows it did not identify the risk of its firefighters being caught in a landslide. It says as the firefighters were locals, they knew about Muriwai's general susceptibility to landslides, but didn't recognise the warning signs that indicated an imminent landslide threat. Urban search and rescue crew are trained for landslides, but fewer than 200 FENZ firefighters of more than 10,000 are trained USAR personnel. The report has made 4 recommendations, including, crucially, to review training programs to increase awareness of the hazard of landslides. FENZ Chief Executive Kerry Gregory says training and equipment for staff will improve.
These actions won't change what happened to Dave and Craig, but as adverse events like Cyclone Gabrielle become more common and unpredictable, the steps we're taking will give a greater level of knowledge and training to keep our firefighters safer in these circumstances.
Auckland Local Secretary of the Professional Firefighters Union, Martin Campbell, says the findings show FENZ's failure to plan.
There is no accountability in the organisation and there's no responsibility. So it's really concerning that, unfortunately, the warnings that the union has been saying for so long haven't been taken seriously, and we've got this sort of result, unfortunately.
He says FENZ is failing to train its people for what they'll encounter.
NZQA has just released a very damning report on fire and emergency that highlighted that the qualified volunteer firefighter training program is not up to standard. It isn't fulfilling the needs that our qualified volunteer firefighters actually need.
The Qualifications Authority review of FENZ's training of volunteer firefighters says it has gaps and weaknesses. NZPFU National Secretary Watty Watson says FENZ is letting its people down.
It's hugely damaging. Its performance at best marginal through to poor. FENZ is letting down the volunteers significantly, and I think this is very relevant given FENZ's own report into the Muriwai investigation.
Rodney Local Board Chair Brent Bailey says it isn't time to place blame.
It's very sort of impactful that the FENZ has found some shortcomings in its processes and procedures and training. Let's learn from them. Let's make sure this never happens again.
Chair of the United Fire Brigades Association, Peter Dunn, hopes people will continue to volunteer.
Dave and Craig were committed to serving their community, and I'm sure there'll be other people around who will want to continue that legacy and continue to serve their community. What's important, of course, is that they're able to do so in a safe environment as possible.
WorkSafe and police are also investigating the 2 men's deaths.
It is 11 minutes after 5. Kia amo tunu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. 3 commercial helicopter tour operators have pleaded guilty and will no longer face trial over health and safety failings in the lead-up to the deadly Whakaari eruption in 2019. A judge-alone trial is due to start next week at Auckland District Court. Today's guilty pleas takes the number of defendants down to 6, including the island's owners, 3 members of the Buttle family. The 11th hour guilty pleas mean the start of the trial will be delayed by 1 day. Judge Evangelos Thomas told the court WorkSafe will need time to adjust its case.
Obviously, with these 3 defendants pleading guilty on effectively the last working day before the start of our trial. That creates some very real difficulties for the parties that still remain in that trial to be ready on Monday, because the landscape for trial is now far different than it was yesterday or 2 days ago.
Amy Williams has been at court at the hearing and she joins us now. Amy, what happened and what charges are we talking about here?
Yeah, well, the trial, as you've just heard, was due to start on Monday. Then just this afternoon, a hearing was called. Volcanic Air, Kahu and Arius have entered guilty pleas to amended charges. Each of these companies had licence agreement with the island's owners through a company, Whakaari Management, to land and provide guided walking tours on the island. So the charges relate to health and safety leading up to the eruption, but not including that time or the rescue efforts afterwards. So WorkSafe found the companies had failed to do risk assessments and provide protective gear. In all cases, gas masks were inadequate, it found. One example from the summary of facts, which has been released today, shows that Volcanic Air and Arius, their emergency procedures for volcanic eruptions was for tourists to shelter behind rocks in the helicopter or in a shipping container and then evacuate. And similar for Kahu, the statement of summary of facts says its emergency procedure relied on pilots not being injured so they could conduct an evacuation. So it's important to note the charges don't relate to the rescue efforts on the day of the eruption. But on the day, 22 of the 22 people who died, one was a customer of Volcanic Air. So from here, the companies will be sentenced in August, and the fines for the charges range from $500,000 to $1.5 million.
Okay. Now, as you mentioned, some of the pilots did receive bravery awards. Now, just remind us what that was about.
That's separate to the trial, which is the more legal elements of the whole thing. So the awards, in the awards, some commercial pilots who were near the island on the day of the eruption, they've been heralded as heroes. So 5 pilots were awarded the New Zealand Bravery Decoration. That includes Kahu Chief Executive and former SAS soldier Mark Law. He, of course, Kahu is one of the companies today that's pleaded guilty. So he was the first person to arrive on the island after it erupted, risking his own life to rescue people after the disaster.
And what happens from this point onwards with the legal stuff?
Yeah, well, the trial is still set down for 16 weeks, although Judge Evangelos Thomas has said today that it's unlikely to take that long. Now that 6 parties have pled guilty, that leaves 6 to face trial, including the island's owners. I think that's where the interest will lie for this trial now. They're charged as directors, 3 members of the Buttle family, brothers Andrew, James and Peter. They jointly own Whakaari Management, which is the company that provided the leases to the tour operators. So under the Health and Safety at Work Act, directors can be prosecuted, and it can be in the public interest to hold these directors to account. So from here, the trial starts a day later than planned on Tuesday at Auckland District Court. It is being held in a large courtroom at the Environment Court. That's to accommodate the sheer number of people expected to take part in the proceedings, legal teams, media, a large public gallery for any family that want to attend. And for Whakatane locals, it's being live streamed to a virtual courtroom at Acacia House, so they'll be able to go along and see it there.
Thank you very much, Amy. That is Amy Williams with that update from court. Medical workers employed by one of the country's largest laboratory service providers will walk off the job next week in Wellington and the South Island after a breakdown in contract talks. The labs are warning there will be delays for patients, but there will also be contingency arrangements for critical or life-preserving services. The techs and scientists process tests for everything from cancers to kidney and liver function and, of course, COVID. The strike follows a breakdown between the lab services that are privately owned by parent company Awanui and workers covered by the Apex union. Apex says the average wage increase claim across the different lab professions is about 23%. Next week, different specialty staff will walk off the job on Wednesday and Thursday, with more strikes planned for the following Monday and Tuesday. Joining us now is New Zealand Institute of Medical Laboratory Science President Terry Taylor. Hi, Terry.
Hi, kia ora, Lisa.
How has it got to this?
Well, yeah, there's a bit of history behind all of this, as everyone is probably well aware. I mean, the profession of medical laboratory science and our scientists and technicians, everyone will be well aware, took an incredible hammering during the pandemic, with a vast amount of testing being thrust into our diagnostic laboratories and a workforce which really stood up to the plate and did some pretty amazing things. But it really, one of the things it did was highlight just some of the inherent issues that we do have within our sector in this country.
Let's start with pay. What kind of pay do these workers get compared to other medical professions?
Yeah, well, that's one of the sticking points, of course, of being a profession which is not instantly recognised, like the nurses or the doctors that we actually practice alongside. It is no secret that we are the poorest paid frontline medical registered health profession in this country. Some of our technicians are on barely above the minimum wage, never mind the living wage. And as it sits at the moment, we are sitting around about 30 to 40% below the nurses. So that just gives an indication of how far things have slipped, because when I actually started in this profession, we used to be ahead of the nursing profession, and now, as far as salaries go, we sit way behind. And not just in the salary side, it also extends into the training and education commitment and basically how things are going within our workplaces as well.
Terry, how long do you have to train for to be a lab scientist?
Okay, to be a medical laboratory scientist in this country takes 4 years of undergraduate study, and then they serve an internship, in other words, a 6 to 9 month period until they get their full registration. But just on that, that's not much change out of 5 years, but obviously to become a senior or an experienced scientist, put another 5 to 7 years on top of that as well.
And
so
what's
we're
the
no
top
different.
pay, Terry?
Yeah.
What's the top pay you could get for that? I'm just looking at a pay scale here.
Automatic increment for our scientists. Obviously, they walk into the profession at just under $60,000, and with the automatic increments, they can get close to $80,000. But that's it. That's as far as it goes, and that takes many, many years.
How are you doing in terms of people staying in the job, or are they leaving?
No, that's our retention is at a what I would call absolutely perilous state. We really have to think about how we can recognise these people and pay them better. We have some of our technicians move into the hospitality sector because they get paid a lot more. So the likes of the KFCs and the coffee shops, they actually pay better than being a registered health professional in this country, which is a real indictment on where we are at the moment.
Terry, you are aware, are you, because this is important, are you aware of people leaving to go work in cafes and fast food takeaway joints?
Oh, definitely. It's the reality of working in an environment where the work and the conditions are not sustainable for these people to actually feed their families or never alone survive. I think it really is an indictment. And when we see the money that's being thrown around to the other health professions, look, you've got to look at us. If you do not have a functioning pathology workforce, you do not have a health system. That's it. No pathology, no healthcare.
Terry,
That's how it works.
Some people won't understand that. I mean, the types of tests that you're talking and the role that these technicians and lab scientists play. I mean, what percentage of patients would need these tests to determine a course of care, for example? Do you know?
Yeah, well, it's a well-known, and one of the problems in this country is our data collection because things are so fragmented. But just to put it in perspective, in a hospital setting, you're looking at almost all of the clinical decisions are going to rely on a laboratory test or diagnostic tool of some sort that's provided by technicians and scientists and our pathologists to give the patient the the treatment regime that's needed, the diagnostic pathways, the medications. It's all related to the work of the scientists and technicians. Unfortunately, you don't see that because we're not out in the open like everyone else. I mean, COVID gave us that opportunity, but it's almost like we've been forgotten about again. Let's just get back in the lab and be hidden and no one cares.
When the union says, on average, the wage increase claim is about 23%, people will be, choking on their Friday chips because that's a big wad of money, Terry. So, I mean, realistically, what needs to happen here?
Look, I think to pay health professionals what they should get to be able to do their job to the best of their ability should be a given. It shouldn't be something to be negotiated with, in my mind. But that's
money doesn't grow on trees, Terry. There's only so much money to go around, and you have pointed out the fact that nurses have asked for money, teachers are asking for money. There is only so much money.
There is, and the reality here is that as a profession, we are the one that has been left behind the most. It's just not sustainable for the health system to continue in this way. If you don't have the engine running and checking on the engine the way it should be, we will have trouble further along the lines. And everyone knows what happened during COVID when we got overrun. Similar situation could be upon us if we keep going down this pathway.
Good to talk to you, Terry. Thanks for joining us. That is Terry Taylor. He's president of the New Zealand Institute of Medical Laboratory Science. And in a statement from Awanui Group on behalf of its lab services, it says it's disappointed the union initiated strike action after a single day of bargaining, and it will be tabling a package next week. It says the industrial action will affect laboratory services in Wellington, Nelson, Christchurch, South Canterbury, Otago and Southland regions, and will mean delays to services or no services at all in most of those regions. Blood testing in the community will be severely impacted across the South Island, and some regions will not have community collection services available from the 12th to the 18th of July. They say priority will be ensuring those who are seriously ill still receive the critical life-preserving services that they need. 24 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o Whakaari, we would love to hear your feedback about anything you've heard on the program this evening. You can text us 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, and the email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's go to the headlines now. Ko ewe anō tēnei.
Fire and Emergency New Zealand says training and equipment will improve after it failed to instruct firefighters on landslide risks. Volunteers Craig Stevens and Dave van Svanenberg died after a Muriwai property collapsed in a slip during Cyclone Gabrielle. A FENZ investigations found they hadn't been trained to recognise the warning signs. 3 commercial helicopter tour operators have admitted health and safety failings in the lead-up to the 2019 Whakaari White Island eruption, in which 22 people lost their lives and will no longer face trial. 6 defendants, including the island's owners, will face a judge-alone trial starting in Auckland next week. Staff working for one of the country's largest laboratory service providers will walk out next week in a dispute over pay. The Awanui workers process tests, including those for cancer, and the action will affect services in Wellington, Nelson, Christchurch, South Canterbury, Otago and Southland. Contingency arrangements will be in place for critical services. Hospital midwives are set to receive a 15% pay increase after talks with the government. But 1,300 self-employed midwives aren't covered, and they're taking their pay equity fight to court in August next year. And the US Food and Drug Administration has granted full approval to a closely watched Alzheimer's drug. Japanese drug maker Asahi says early results suggest the IV drug Leqembi works by clearing a sticky brain plaque linked to the memory-sapping disease. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, State Highway 25 in Coromandel is now fully open by Ruamahunga in both directions, day and night, under a temporary speed limit of 50 kilometres per hour. And there's nothing to report on our main routes around the country tonight, although the last time I said that, we had overlooked an egregious traffic jam on Auckland's southern motorway. I say we, but I mean me. Do text us and let us know if we've missed something. If you can do so safely, 2101.
Don't you worry, Evie, they'll be on to you. 2101. All Blacks coach Ian Foster kicks off his final season in charge with a Rugby Championship opener against Argentina on Sunday. Tickets to the game in Mendoza sold out 2 months ago, and the New Zealand players are expecting plenty of emotion from the Pumas and their fans during the clash. But the action doesn't stop there. New Zealand rugby fans will also get to watch the Black Ferns and the All Blacks 15 this weekend. We're joined now by our sports reporter, Felicity Reid. Are there any surprises in the first All Blacks team of the year, Felicity?
Well, for the past couple of years, every time an All Blacks team has been named, we've been focusing on first five, and what's seen is that two-way battle between Reti Mo'unga and Beauden Barrett for that number 10 jersey. But actually, for the Chiefs playmaker, Damien McKenzie has got the nod for the first test of the year. He starts ahead of Reti Mo'unga, who's on the bench, and Beauden Barrett actually moves back to fullback. So Mackenzie wasn't actually in the All Blacks last season, and that's coach Ian Foster has said it's kind of a vote of confidence to give him this starting place in the first test of the season. And he admits that probably Mackenzie had a few nerves about coming back into the squad for this as well. Another Chiefs player who's getting an opportunity is lock Josh Lord. He hasn't been in the side since 2021. His injury has kept him out of that. And also it's wing Imoni Narawa gets to make his All Blacks debut. So the discussion as well has been around, has Ian Foster been holding players back for the World Cup or for the upcoming Rugby Championship games? But he stopped short of saying that he's actually put out his best side, but he said it's the best 15 for this week.
We stated right at the start of naming this team is that, we really wanted to make sure we were building the combinations with an eye to the future now. So that's always been part of our plan. And the balancing act is how you work that around giving people opportunity and making sure that we're open to the form of some players coming in.
And so having the first test of the year offshore is actually quite a foreign concept for Foster. That hasn't happened under his tenure before. But also overseas, we've got the Black Ferns playing Canada in Ottawa. So this is their second game of the Pacific Four Series. They've cleaned out their front row since that big win over the Wallabies, the 50-point win in the first game of the season. Experienced loose head prop Philippa Love gets her first start. Kelsey Tanetti gets her second test as a 15s player. An uncapped loose forward Lucy Jenkins is named in the reserves. There is stability through the rest of the squad, and Alan Bunting, who's the coach, says he wants them to be more patient in this test as well, even though they've got quite a big win behind them. He wants them to be more careful against Canada, who he sees as maybe a bit more of a tougher opponent than the Wallaroos were last week. And also the All Blacks 15 actually kick us off for action. They're playing Japan 15 in Tokyo, and there are 6 capped All Blacks in that side.
OK, let's move on to tennis, and it's all go at Wimbledon, right? So the night curfew suspended play in the match between Andy Murray and Stefanos Tsitsipas, and the Greek players' hair routine is lighting up social media. What is this all about?
Yeah, Tsitsipas has what some might call luscious locks. They're kind of shoulder-length blonde, got a bit of a curl to it. But the BBC actually asked him about his hair care routine, and they've put it out on social media, and it's quite in-depth, so let me go through it for you. 20 minutes of combing it. He does the good double shampoo. He follows that with a hair mask, olive oil, baby oil, and some Greek herbs. All of that, he says he does every day. I do feel like maybe he was playing it up and being a bit of a good sport for TikTok. But, my boss was quite interested to know if he actually had to go through all of that last night before he got into bed after that match that had run quite late and up against the curfew.
Maybe he does in the morning. Gets up, gets ready and rolls out.
Well, he might have to be quick this morning if he's going back out onto court.
Exactly. Thanks, Felicity. Sports reporter Felicity Reid there. For more than 3 decades, motorists travelling through the central North Island on State Highway 1 couldn't miss the old aeroplane on the side of the road. It's been wasting away on top of shipping containers, its wings and propellers removed. But now the owner of the world-famous in New Zealand landmark wants it to find a new home. Our reporter Jimmy Ellingham has the story.
The blue and white DC-3 was for decades a tourist attraction in the small town of Mangaweka, but 2 years ago the old plane was moved to Shannon in Horowhenua. Despite having seen better days, the plane has remained the focus of plenty of cameras and curious looks. Now owner Minty Cottle has decided to put it on the market.
I would have loved to build $1 million building to put it in and love it. I would have loved to have, I collect a lot of NAC stuff, history, would have been great, but just the enormity of a couple of other things I got going on and want to do, the direction I'm going is I don't want to build that $1 million building to put it in. And because this is not Nevada, Arizona desert where, it's good for these.
The plane was called Poaka when flying for the National Airways Corporation near New Zealand's predecessor back in the 50s and 60s. Its working life ended in Manawatu before the move to Mangaweka, where Mr Cottle bought it a few years ago. He's hoping the old bird will fetch about $85,000, but he's not had any firm offers yet. Nonetheless, his phone is constantly buzzing with inquiries.
There's plenty of endless business opportunities for a financial purpose, but also for a static display purpose for their business. It's just, out the gate, mate, where are you going to go find another one, You're not going to make one out of paper mache.
Its 29-metre wingspan has ruled out some interested parties.
So there's a lot of layers of paint on there, so it needs a good clean. No, it's in good condition. All around it really is pretty sound, and it needs time spent on it, definitely. But there's enthusiasts out there who love these things, so the right person who buys it, the enthusiasts will come as a club and they will happily work on it, I'm sure, no problem at all.
Wherever it goes, the move will require plenty of planning, as it did when it shifted to Shannon, which Mr Cottle says was to keep the plane safe from vandals.
No, I had to take the propellers off. At one point was going to get the one New Zealand's biggest chopper to lift it, but the logistics of that, the hard thing was getting it from Mangaweka to here wouldn't have been a problem with that big chopper that does logging. The problem is PC world of it being bought by a helicopter slung all the way from there across main highways is the problem. If something did happen and it fell, that's the big problem.
Back in the early 1980s, when the DC-3 moved from Palmerston North to Mangaweka, the rules were less stringent. John Eames was part of a consortium that bought it for $4,000 and had it towed on the road, facing backwards with its wings taken off.
It was a different era too, I tell you, because talk about towing, it was pretty big on the road. But the traffic control. These days you've got probably 2 utes with flashing lights in front of it and one behind. In 1984, my little Subaru station wagon with me and my wife in it were the lead car, and that was all there was, really.
The idea was to have something that would stand out and put Mangaweka on the map.
It was bought by the Rangatiki River Adventures Company Limited that was recently formed at the time in 1981. We were a bunch of farmers, to be honest, but we wanted to get into tourism, which was lacking here. So we bought that on a whim. One of my partners said we should buy one of those. They were offered by Field Air, who were retiring them from top dressing.
It took a while to make the trip north.
It didn't get up there till 1984. It was lifted into its position beside the highway on the 1st of November 1984, and it caused quite a sensation.
John Eames and his wife Viv ended up owning the plane outright, and it sat next to their cafe for 18 years, including when it had its memorable cookie time paint job. Mr Eames has fond memories of the plane, which locals claimed as their own, and is interested to see what will happen next.
We were perfectly comfortable about it leaving ourselves, really. Some of the townsfolk weren't. They thought it belonged to them, really. Our aeroplane, but it never did. It only belonged to us, as in my wife and I in the finish.
So if you've got plenty of space, a lot of free time and more than a bit of spare elbow grease, you could write the next chapter in the long story of this much-loved plane.
And if you were listening to that on radio, do check out the story on web. There's some great pictures attached to it, some very old school ones and more recent. And we would love to hear from you. If you've got any ideas about what should happen to the plane, do get in touch, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz, or you can text us on 2101. 25 minutes to 6, Ki amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It is time for business with Beckford, ko taku hoa NINA, called Giles Beckford, joining us from Wellington. Okay, another group of people miserable. Giles, when are you going to turn up with someone who's happy?
They don't pay me to turn up here and be a churm jeer or some sort of morale officer, Lisa. I'm here to give you the facts.
Okay, the facts on the retail sector, please.
The latest people who are a little downbeat, shall we say, is the retail sector. Retail NZ has put out its regular look at the sector. It says 36% of retailers aren't confident that they will last the coming 12 months. There may be a little bit of pessimism overload in that figure, but it sort of tallies with the figures that they have about their sales. About half of them didn't meet their sales targets in the first 3 months of the year. Nearly 60% didn't meet the sales targets in the 3 months that have just gone by, ended June. And it's familiar reasons for it. Households aren't spending the way they used to. High interest rates, rent rises, rates, just generally slow down in economic activity, all taking their toll on retailers. The most miserable, the ones finding it the toughest, are the ones in the discretionary finance area, which is notably clothing and durable goods. So the retail figures would tend to suggest that apart from the boost to sales receipts from inflation, sales volumes have been struggling in the past 6 months. That's all consistent with the Reserve Bank plan of slowing the economy to try and knock inflation on the head. We'll see how that goes. Latest read from the Reserve Bank, by the way, is next week.
And on equal pay, gender gap campaigners are getting a bit antsy with the government, yeah?
They are ever just so slightly. I mean, equal pay's been around for 50 years now in this country, and the government in particular has made some real efforts to bring equal pay to particular sectors of the workforce. Well and good. But one of the things that this campaign called Mind the Gap wants is mandatory reporting of gender pay gaps. Now, it's mandatory in the public service, and around 100 private sector firms, some of them really big, have signed up for it as well. And what the people are saying is, well, the government, when it was celebrating 50 years of equal pay last year, it gave us a nod and a wink and a tacit understanding they were going to move on this gender pay gap reporting. And the quote that I have from Delwyn Stewart, one of the co-founders, is, "It's not hard. It's been around for quite a while. New Zealand is falling way behind the international pack. You can't fix the pay gaps if you don't know what they are." And this is what they want. Make it mandatory. Come out with one uniform song sheet that everybody subscribes to and sings from. We can start making progress on, equalising things, closing those gaps. Their view is, it's got stuck somewhere in the political machine, and the message is very simple. Pull your finger out, do something. You can design something simple because you've got all the bare bones there, and do it before the election, please.
And Giles, please, a Friday frolic through the markets. Thanks.
Just a little canter before the weekend. The top 50 index, it looked like it was going to get a real hiding when it opened up this morning. Following Wall Street, it was down more than 100 points at one stage, but it's pulled its finger out, it's turned around, it's sneaked over the line with a 21-point gain, just touching 11,980 for the Kiwi. 61.7 US cents, 92.9 Australian. And for the markets, the key thing is US jobs numbers, which will be out overnight and will set the tone for next week.
Thank you, Giles. Ka kite, Giles Beckford there with Business News. Let's get to a bit of your feedback. Some of you be getting in touch about our interview about the lab workers, some of whom are going on strike next week over their pay claim. A nurse has got in touch to say, "I'm a nurse with 20 years experience. I have a master's degree. So much of what we do relies on lab staff diagnostics. I can't help but think we don't value science nor education. This is where we are. Good luck to us." Another person's got in touch, an electrician with 15 years experience, who says they just got offered $30 an hour. "I took a supermarket job instead with no stress or responsibility for $26 an hour. Better hours. Insane world," they say. And another listener says, "I used to be a medical laboratory technician. I earned less than I earned per hour at a fast food house when I was at school. Now I'm a nurse. Not a high salary, but better than being a med lab tech." Do keep your feedback coming, 2101 on text, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Nationals pledging to restore pared back plans for the new Dunedin Hospital to their original specifications, meaning more operating theatres, specialist equipment and inpatient beds. if it's in government. It estimates upsizing will cost close to $30 million, but it won't mean all elements of the initial hospital plan are reinstated. National's health spokesperson Dr. Shane Reti spells out his party's election promise.
What the National Party will do is we will put back what Labor removed in December. So we will return the build for its fit-out back to the detailed business case. That has three main parts to it. One, 2 operating theatres. The second is the PET scanner. And the third is 23 beds. We will put them back.
All right, so let's go through those things so that we can be absolutely sure. In total, the hospital, as you would build it, would have how many inpatient beds compared to what Labor is doing?
We'll have 321 beds. That is, more specifically, exactly what the detailed business case said it would have. We will place back.
Right, so you're actually not going back to the original specifications, as Christopher Luxon said, because Michael Woodhouse at your very own press conference said the original plan had 480 beds. So you're still shy of that.
The detailed business case is the plan that we're talking about, because you have original plans, they go through program business cases. The detailed business case is the one that's agreed and confirmed on, and that's the one that after 4 years eventually was settled on by the government, and then in December last year they pulled these pieces out of it, amongst other things. So we'll put those parts back to the detailed business case.
Operating theatres, your total compared to Labor's total, please?
28 compared to 26. So we're putting 2 back to what they said they would have. I mean, if we're going to address the waiting list, there's 2,700 waiting more than 4 months in the southern DHB region. We're clearly going to need operating theatres to do that. So we're going to put those operating theatres back and back our clinicians.
What about the size of the lab diagnostic area, which was downsized in the plans? Are you going to put that back to its original capacity and size?
No, what we've said is we won't change the footprint of the building that's now been agreed on, because to do that would then go through further consenting processes and would just further hold up this project. We need to start building. So the footprint as it is, which includes the canopy and the link, which was all removed, the footprint as it is what it is. It's the refit into those shelled spaces that we've said we'll put services back into.
Okay, so you in essence, you're picking and choosing which bits you're going to restore, because when it comes to the diagnostic labs, professionals in that area say 80% of patients need these kinds of tests, and that will become a choke point, but you're not restoring that to the original size.
What we're putting back is those are 3 components back to the detailed business case.
Okay, so the additional costs of doing this will be what, as you estimate them?
29.8 million.
And where's that money going to come from?
That's going to come from our capital infrastructure program.
Okay, so how can you, or how could a national government afford this where a Labor government cannot?
Oh, that's for them to describe where their funding's going from, and I think we saw news of that this morning with $540 million in rat test inventory. So, we'll come up with our fiscal plan pre-election, where you'll see where our funds are coming from, but we also need to put that in the context that Chris and Nicola have said that health and education will be portfolios that will receive new money every year.
But you can't say where this $29.5 million extra is going to come from. Exactly. Where are you going to find that money?
It will be announced when we announce our pre-election fiscal plan.
Repurposed money taken from other projects, or will it be absolutely new money?
That is likely to be new money. Again, we'll identify that in our fiscal plan, but this is likely to be the new money that we're putting aside to health. Then we need to imagine 29.8. Yes, of course, it is a number, but in the context of a $1.58 billion hospital build, it would seem to be really important, but not in that context. That's a big number, 1.58, biggest hospital build ever in New Zealand.
Yeah, that's tens of millions of dollars, though. And while voters need to have some confidence as to where it is coming from, so you can't give them that confidence right now.
We'll give them that confidence that in the fiscal plan before the election, all our manifesto items will be fully costed.
Okay. The people of Dunedin have had a lot of disappointment on and off around this hospital. So can you assure them that you will do what you are promising for the money that you say?
We have made a commitment here this morning to the people of the South and to clinicians that we will retrofit this equipment and these beds back into the shell spaces when the new hospital has been built.
By what deadline?
2026 is when we're understanding the shell will be ready for us to fit the equipment back, so that is when we'd like to start.
And would you stake your future job on meeting those goals in that budget?
We'll keep our commitment to fulfilling the detailed business case as it's been relayed to us. There are surprises here. I mean, they won't share with us, the government won't share with us how much of the contingency for the whole project is left. Apparently that's commercially sensitive, so there are some hidden financial matters there, but we've made a commitment here today that if the shell is ready for us to put back the beds and the PET scanner in the operating theatre, then that's what we'll do.
And that is National's health spokesperson, Dr. Shane Reti. It is 13 minutes away from 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Do keep your feedback coming, 2101 on text or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Time for us to get to the headlines. A little late, sorry about that. Anea Iwi, mina pita pita kōrero.
The president of the New Zealand Institute of Medical Laboratory Science, Terry Taylor, has told Checkpoint lab staff retention is in an absolutely perilous state and people can and are earning more in cafes and fast food takeaways. Staff working for one of the country's largest lab service providers, Awanui, who process a range of tests, including for liver function, will walk out next week, affecting services in Wellington and the South Island. The Prime Minister says what he calls New Zealand's independent foreign policy won't change under his leadership. In his first foreign policy speech since becoming Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins said today his approach to foreign affairs is similar to his domestic priorities, making sure this country is economically resilient. Wellington iwi leader Dr. Ihakara Porutu Puketapu has died at the age of 89. The Te Atiawa Kaumātua was known for his role as Secretary for the Māori Affairs Department. He also chaired the Management Committee of Te Māori, the first international exhibition of Māori objects as art. Ukraine's President Zelensky is due to meet the Turkish leader Recep Tayyip Erdogan on the latest leg of a tour ahead of the NATO summit in Lithuania next week. Mr. Zelensky is expected to urge Mr. Erdogan to back Sweden's application for membership to the alliance. And legendary rock band The Eagles have announced their last ever tour will kick off in September in New York. The Eagles have been performing for more than 50 years. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, not a lot to report, although one texter says there are long traffic delays at the intersection of State Highway 30 and 33 in Rotorua because of roadworks. They add ridiculous. Our next news and weather is at 6.
Kia ora rā e ho. 1,300 self-employed midwives will be waiting more than a year to go to court and fight to get pay equity. 5 years of negotiations with government has meant hospital midwives will receive a 15% pay increase. But self-employed community midwives are still waiting. Jemima Houston reports.
Self-employed midwife Melanie Nicholson is happy hospital midwives have made some progress in improving their pay. But she's frustrated her workforce is being held back.
We feel pretty let down at this point that it's taking so long and that our pay equity process is so slow.
Self-employed midwives are publicly funded by Te Whatu Ora, but working as sole traders means they can't take industrial action. New Zealand College of Midwives Chief Executive Alison Eddy says they have had to take legal action to seek better pay and working conditions. But they won't have their day in court until August 2024, meaning self-employed midwives will wait more than a year before their case is heard.
We really don't want to take away the success of this significant milestone for employed midwives, but we absolutely need to make sure we have relativity between the pay of the employed and self-employed workforces.
Melanie Nicholson says the strain on the wider healthcare sector has meant midwives working in the community are run off their feet. Some midwives are on call 24/7 and are taking on the role of GPs.
Self-employed midwives are addressing other gaps in the healthcare system from other sectors that are unable to be met. So it's not unusual for a midwife to be called on a weekend for something that's not related to the pregnancy.
The industry is also dealing with a 40% shortage in its workforce, meaning expecting mothers are struggling to get the antenatal care they need. Hutt Maternity Action Trust Chair Meg Waghorn says women are being denied a choice in care.
As numbers go down, there becomes less availability of home birth midwives. So a choice that New Zealand women may have assumed that they may no longer have because there just aren't home birth midwives available.
Julia Fitzgerald wanted to work with a self-employed midwife to have consistency throughout her pregnancy, but was unable to find one. She wishes her GP had been clearer about what her options were if she didn't find a midwife. She also would have liked to receive better communication from the midwives she contacted.
We'd call and text all the midwives on the list and they wouldn't get back to us. So you never really knew where you stood. I appreciate that midwives are really busy and they're so short-staffed and it's an incredibly undervalued profession. But I think, just having that communication would be so important.
Melanie Nicholson says having to decline requests for self-employed midwifery care due to not having capacity is challenging. She says more investment needs to be put into the midwifery industry.
Until the government addresses the workforce shortages in a really strategic, dynamic way, I don't know how we can resolve that. We can't create new midwives overnight.
New Zealand College of Midwives says work to improve conditions for self-employed midwives started in 2015. It is promising to continue to advocate for midwives and get a pay result next year.
It is 8 minutes away from 6. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Yevgeny Prigozhin, the man who led the short-lived mutiny in Russia last month, is said to be back on home soil. The Wagner boss was offered a move to Belarus under a deal to end the standoff, but the Belarus leader, Alexander Lukashenko, says he's back in Russia. The developments are being closely watched by Ukraine, which remains concerned about Wagner fighters making Belarus their new home. The ABC's Nick Dole reports.
On Russian state TV, a reporter breathlessly lists the luxury goods found in one of Yevgeny Prigozhin's palaces. The cameras are allowed in to see the helicopter, the gold bars, guns, multiple passports, even a bizarre collection of wigs. But that wasn't the strangest thing to happen. In neighbouring Belarus, President Alexander Lukashenko, who offered refuge to Yevgeny Prigozhin, revealed the failed Russian mutineer wasn't there at all. He's in St. Petersburg, he said. Where is he this morning? He might have left for Moscow or for somewhere else, but he's not on Belarusian territory. So, where is he? Given Prigozhin's failed uprising last month caused perhaps the biggest ever threat to Putin's leadership, you might expect he'd be under close surveillance. But publicly, at least, the Kremlin says it's not following him. We don't track his movements, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov says. We neither have the opportunity nor the wish to do that. Like Prigozhin, the whereabouts of hundreds of Wagner mercenaries remains a mystery. Satellite images from Belarus appear to show a tent city being erected to house them. Alexander Lukashenko says he's still happy to host the mercenaries and he hopes they could even train his own troops. But that has its own risks.
This cannot be dismissed as something small and something like a nuisance. No, this is big. This is serious.
Valery Kavaliuski is the foreign affairs representative for Belarus's transitional cabinet, an alternate government that refuses to accept the results of the 2020 election, which was widely regarded as being rigged. He's told AM Lukashenko could have real trouble controlling Wagner forces, especially if their leader isn't around.
Let's imagine that a bunch of people, well-trained, ruthless, with a lot of weapons, end up on a foreign territory and they start behaving the way they like to behave. They are unruly, they are formidable, and nobody wants to challenge them. They can do anything they want, and what would be the law to regulate their behavior?
Ukraine says it's strengthening its defences near the Belarusian border so that if Wagner forces ever reorganise, it will be ready.
Kiwis have lost millions to cyber scams, and across the ditch, the losses are being estimated in the billions. But as cyber criminals become increasingly sophisticated, one Aussie bank has launched a new initiative it hopes will be a major crackdown. The ABC's Matt Bamford reports.
The suspicious text message or email is an annoying and increasingly common part of modern life. At first glance, what might seem like a transaction alert or a product offer can often be a front for fraudsters. It's a practice called phishing, and it's very effective.
We do know from industry research that phishing targets open about 70% of the phishing emails they receive, so they've got a pretty high penetration rate.
Dr. Sulette Dreyfus is a cybersecurity researcher from the University of Melbourne.
They create a sense of urgency. Quick, you have to do this or something bad is going to happen. They create an aura of authority. Oftentimes, they're offering a solution that's a really quick, easy solution. Just click here, just fill this in, and your problem will go away.
It's a growing problem for banks, who are responsible for safeguarding their customers' money.
We make 1 billion payments per year and we get 10,800 scams. Now, we want to stop the 10,800 scams because that's growing at about 30 to 40% a year, so it's a growing problem.
Ross McEwen is CEO of National Australia Bank.
We need to put a little bit more friction into the process in Australia as it becomes even more and more digital and everyone wants things done instantaneously.
Now NAB's hoping to slow scammers down by cutting back on the number of links in the text messages it sends to customers.
For example, in the body of the text, say to people, could you go and connect onto this website, please? Or we will be sending you an email without any links. Could you follow the instructions on those? So it's getting back to, I think, some pretty direct communication.
Federal Financial Services Minister Stephen Jones says it's an important step forward.
Because embedded URLs in SMS messages are a key vector for distributing scams and frauds. It's how, at scale, industrialised criminal networks send dangerous messages through the economy.
So how much of a dent will this make against cybercrime? Cybersecurity researcher Dr. Sulette Dreyfus.
Every little step that we take in the right direction is a good thing, and it all adds up in the end.
And while at times it might seem like criminals are winning the cyber war, Dr. Dreyfus says efforts are underway to make the online world a little safer.
The more transparent and open we can be when attacks are done, about how they're done, and communicating that to the public and what needs to be done to fix it, I think the better off we are.
Let's get to some of your feedback now. This person on the Dunedin Hospital and National's election promise. How can National be promising all this new spending like the new Dunedin Hospital when the central core of their promises is to cut taxes? Less income can't mean more spending, they say. And this one, you can build as many hospitals as you like, but without the staff, they will not function. In the same vein as the earlier one, Gary says, how will National fund the Dunedin Hospital rebuild after tax cuts? This clapped out plane on State Highway 1 near Shannon has really caught your imagination. Sarah's got in touch. It's well remembered and much admired, said Sarah. If they're quick, the owners might be able to sell it to the Prime Minister, who's looking for a replacement for his Air Force dunga. Replacing one dunga with another, I think, would make quite a splash on many international tarmacs. And someone else says, I remember the Smash Palace in Gisborne had a DC3 as a restaurant. Yes, well, as a Gisbogan, I remember the DC3. I think it was more of a bar than a restaurant, my recollection.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening. Ngā mihi o te pō, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The police are investigating allegations that more than 1,000 properties around the country were issued fraudulent building consents. Engineering New Zealand says engineer Jonathan Bow Hall of Kodiak Consulting completed and signed documents by using others' identities. The reports in question include producer statements supposed to assure councils that a design meets the building code. Engineering New Zealand's chief executive, Richard Templer, says at least 42 councils have been affected by Mr Hall's alleged actions.
The police are conducting an inquiry, and I know that is ongoing, and my understanding is he is cooperating with the police, but I'm not aware of him being arrested.
The Firefighters Union says it's not surprised to hear Fire and Emergency admit shortcomings in its training of staff. An investigation commissioned after 2 volunteer firefighters died in a landslide during Cyclone Gabrielle found FENZ didn't identify landslides as a risk to its personnel and provided no training. Martin Campbell, who's the Auckland Secretary of the Professional Firefighters Union, says the findings show FENZ's failure to plan.
There is no accountability in the organisation and there's no responsibility. So it's really concerning that, unfortunately, the warnings that the union has been saying for so long haven't been taken seriously, and we've got this sort of result, unfortunately.
Fire and Emergency says it's now putting landslide modules into its training program. 1,300 self-employed midwives have to wait more than a year to go to court and fight to get pay equity. Following long negotiations, hospital midwives are set to receive a 15% pay rise. But self-employed midwives are still waiting because they can't take industrial action and have had to take legal action instead. College of Midwives Chief Executive Alison Eddy said they won't have their day in court until August 2024.
We really don't want to take away the success of this significant milestone for employed midwives, but we absolutely need to make sure we have relativity between the pay of the employed and self-employed workforces.
Alison Eddy says although next year's court date seems like a long time to wait, it's a reasonably quick turnaround for such a significant case. Wellington iwi leader Kara Puketapu of Te Atiawa has died at the age of 89. Known to many as Kara, he was the youngest person to be appointed permanent head of a government department when at 43 he became Secretary of Māori Affairs, the first Māori to hold the position. He served in that role for 6 years and later chaired the management committee of Te Māori, the first international exhibition of Māori objects as art. Kara Puketapu will lie in state at Waifetu Marae in Lower Hutt on Sunday before burial on Tuesday. Multiple human-triggered avalanches have prompted the avalanche advisory to remind backcountry travellers not to underestimate the snow conditions. Avalanches large enough to kill, injure and bury people have been triggered in the Southern Lakes area this week. In a 250-metre wide one behind the remarkable ski area on Wednesday, a skier lost their gear but wasn't injured. The advisory says a persistent weak layer in the snowpack means avalanches are possible even at lower danger levels. Ukraine's president has urged NATO to show its strength and unity as its leaders gather for a summit in Lithuania next week. Volodymyr Zelensky is on a whistle-stop tour of NATO countries to rally support for Kyiv to be invited to join the alliance. His words are translated.
We just need an invitation. We understand that there may be difficulties in obtaining the united support of all alliance partners. Some are still looking back at Moscow, some are afraid of Russia, although I believe that this is a great chance to show the courage and the strength of this alliance.
Volodymyr Zelensky has acknowledged that Ukraine's current counteroffensive is slow, but says his country's troops are advancing, not retreating. The Belarusian president has rejected a widely used description of him as Europe's last dictator. Alexander Lukashenko, who is 68, has ruled his country since 1994. His opponents say he has rigged elections, but he says the people have entrusted him with his office and, quote, power is not given for it to wallow in the dirt. Air New Zealand says it fully supports passengers filling out declarations from their phone. It says that in deciding to accept digital declarations, Customs is catching up with what many other countries already do. Jordan Dunn reports.
Starting next week, international arrivals will have the option of declaring their baggage, travel history and personal details online. In what Customs calls the next development in response to border risks, instead of handwriting on a paper arrival card, passengers will be able to do it straight from their phone. Air New Zealand says people have found this faster and easier than the old method. The first airports to fully implement the system will be Wellington and Christchurch, with Queenstown and Auckland getting it in the next few months.
And dozens more flights are being added to cater for New Zealand concert goers travelling across the Tasman to see Taylor Swift early next year. The American singer is scheduled to play 5 shows in Melbourne and Sydney during consecutive weekends in February. Qantas is adding more than 60 flights to and from both cities, including 16 return flights from Wellington and Christchurch. More than 11,000 seats will thus be made available. That's the news.
This week on Music 101, Inoni shares her motivation for her political new album, My Back Was a Bridge for You to Cross. It must change. Tikahu calls in from Canada, Hans Puckett joined me ahead of their New Zealand tour, and poet Hera Lindsay Bird picks her favourite songs on the RNZ mixtape. Music 101, this Saturday from 1pm with me, Charlotte Ryan, here on RNZ National.
You're back with Lisa Owen on Checkpoint next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Saturday. From Northland to Bay of Plenty, including Auckland, periods of rain or showers with some heavy falls. Thunderstorms possible for Northland tomorrow. From Waikato to Taranaki, including Taupo, cloud increasing and rain spreading south this afternoon and evening. Showers tomorrow. From Gisborne to Waded Upper, also Wellington, high cloud today. Rain from tonight with some heavy falls in the east. Whanganui and from Taihape to Kapiti, high cloud today, scattered rain tomorrow. For Marlborough and from Nelson to Fiordland, cloudy periods, occasional rain from this evening. For the remainder of Te Waipounamu, the South Island, fine apart from some areas of low cloud or fog. Cloud increasing Saturday and occasional rain developing in Canterbury in the morning and some scattered rain affecting Otago from the afternoon. And Rekohu, Chatham Islands, occasional showers today, partly cloudy tomorrow. It's 7 minutes past 6. I will have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Kia ora rā e ho, nau mai, hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. There is growing concern about the International Atomic Energy Agency giving the green light for Japan to release more than 1 million tonnes of water from the Fukushima nuclear power plant into the Pacific Ocean. While a majority of Japanese citizens appear to accept that the water has been cleansed of virtually all radioactivity and is safe to discharge into the ocean, Pacific countries and local Japanese fishers aren't so sure. Deutsche Welle's Shemaine Lee reports.
How will Pacific Ocean fish be affected by wastewater from Fukushima's nuclear plant? More than 1 million tonnes of it is set to be released into the ocean. The Japanese government says it poses no risk, but local fishermen are concerned.
We're worried that the reputation of our produce will suffer even more damage. Still, the government has decided to allow the water release. We really cannot accept this. We feel so helpless.
Ever since the tsunami in 2011, water has been used to cool the 3 nuclear reactors devastated by meltdowns. This produces around 100,000 litres of wastewater every day. The energy firm TEPCO runs the water through a treatment system, but it still contains tritium, a radioactive element which in large quantities can cause cancer. But TEPCO says the low levels of tritium mean it's not much different to seawater and has run tests to show that fish can live in it. Still, many are concerned about the long-term effects.
If you ingest something with a beta emitter, like a tuna or an oyster that has radionuclides in it, your internal cells have no protection whatsoever. You don't see these right away. It takes years, sometimes decades, for these numbers to show up.
Other experts say the tritium is so diluted that it's not a problem.
So you get about the same amount in the fish as in the water. And that means the radioactive doses are quite low. And the other factor about tritium is that it's got a very weak radioactive emission.
But the Fukushima plans aren't popular in the wider region either. China, South Korea and the Pacific Islands have all called for a rethink. Despite the opposition, Japan says the release will begin in the coming months and continue for the next 30 years.
Kiev has warned that Russia might be planning detonations at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which it's been occupying since early last year. The nearby town of Nikopol, which is still in Ukrainian hands, faces a double threat. Deutsche Welle's Nikki Conley speaks with local people, starting with Ilya.
I was lying in bed when a shell hit nearby. Glass went flying everywhere. I was covered. It all just happened so fast, I didn't even realise. The sirens go off here every night, and the all clear only comes the next morning. I can't remember a night without the sirens.
Ilya works for a local church. Before the war, they helped people with drug and alcohol addictions. Now he's helping the 40,000 people still left survive. That help is needed more than you might think. This is a town that can't fight back.
The Russians shoot at us every night, and they can just get away with it. They don't even bother to move their guns. They just leave them standing where they were, and they come back when they want to carry on.
And this is why. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, just a few kilometers away. It's occupied by Russian soldiers and their weapons. Those soldiers can make life in Nikopol a nightmare, safe in the knowledge that the Ukrainians won't return fire. The town functions, but only just, and only with help. Since the Kakhovka dam was destroyed, water levels here have dropped dramatically, leaving wells dry. Water and food delivery times are kept secret till the very last minute, for fear that the Russians would target a crowd.
The third and fourth floors of my building were destroyed by shelling. They were just gone. The young man who lives on the fourth floor ended up in my flat on the first floor. We had to help him get the shards of glass out of his legs. I remember the bombings in World War II. I was just a child, but I remember everything. It's all happening again.
People here fear that shelling might not be the only piece of history repeated in this war. Ukrainian leaders say Russia has mined the nuclear power station and would detonate them if forced out by the counteroffensive.
Everyone's talking about the nuclear plant. Wherever you go, when you go to get water or go to the shops, everyone's talking about it. It's really scary. I was pregnant when Chernobyl happened, and my son was born disabled because of it. We got a lot of radiation here in Nikopol back then.
And yet, for now at least, it seems that those who've held out through 16 months of daily shelling aren't going anywhere.
We have young volunteers of 20 or 22 years old coming to help us from the US. They're not scared. If they're not scared, how can we even think about leaving?
The AFL has launched an urgent investigation into the unauthorised sharing of explicit photos of past and present players. The images are purported to show dozens of stars and are being circulated by an anonymous individual or group. It's prompted swift criticism from the Players Association, and the matter's been referred to the E-Safety Commissioner and police. The ABC's Fatima Ulumi reports.
It's being labelled by the AFL Players Association as an appalling and disgusting act, a link making the rounds online to a folder containing sexually explicit images of dozens of former and current AFL players. The AFL Integrity Unit has launched an investigation into the matter. Jimmy Bartell is a former champion player for Geelong.
It's gross. It's understanding that majority of the images are fake, made up, staged, all sorts of stuff. It's someone grubby who hopefully will very quickly gets caught.
Essendon coach Brad Scott agrees.
I think the whole thing's unsavoury, and it's just a good reminder for everyone just to be careful out there, because once you publish something, it's there for a long time.
According to the AFL, the images have been circulated by an anonymous person or group, and many of the photos are yet to be verified for identification. They say a lot of sophisticated work has gone into creating the link and sharing the photos. The CEO of the AFL Players Association is Paul Marsh.
I don't know how, whether players have been hacked, whether players have shared images with trusted people that have somehow ended up in this situation. I think really encouragingly, our understanding is that Google have now taken the drive down, so hopefully that limits the damage. If people out there have copies of these photos, we'd urge you not to share them. This is really sensitive, private stuff, and I just can only imagine what those players are going through.
The matter has been referred to the E-Safety Commissioner and various state police forces, and the AFL says it's working closely with authorities to have these images removed. Acting Commissioner Toby Dagg.
Our greatest success lies in requesting removal of material. That allows us to act very quickly. More than 90% of our requests actually result in successful removal. But if that doesn't succeed, then we can employ compulsory powers to require the platform to remove the material, and the penalty there is a civil penalty, which can be very high, approaching $700,000 a day at the absolute top of the range.
While the E-Safety Commission is an investigative body, it lacks criminal powers. In most states and territories, image-based abuse is a crime. Across most of the country, it's against the law to threaten to share an intimate photo of a person or share it without consent. Tasmania is the exception, given there are no criminal laws specifically addressing image-based abuse. The Acting Commissioner also says it's difficult to determine whether the images are real or fake, but in terms of the law, this may not matter.
It doesn't have to be a verified image of the actual person. So we see that sometimes where an individual's head is photoshopped to the body of a pornographic actor, for example, or a deepfake is provided to us. It's as actionable as if the image was real under our legislation.
Professor Anastasia Powell is a criminologist from RMIT University. She says online platforms can do more to prevent the spread of explicit images.
The platforms clearly do have the means to automatically detect when nude or intimate images are being shared on their platforms. We could see technology providers being more proactive and actually detecting these images and preventing their circulation at the point that they're being shared.
The E-Safety Commission says the majority of reports of image-based abuse it receives impacts young men aged between 18 and 24. The AFL is reaching out to the players impacted for support.
It is 17 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Donald Trump Jr. has postponed speaking dates in Sydney, Brisbane and Melbourne after organisers said his Australian visa only came through at the last minute. Conservative event promoters say they are often left waiting for their foreign speakers to be approved. However, the government denies any different treatment. The ABC's Angus Randall reports.
Promoters were promising a night of candid conversation with one of the key pillars of the Trump family, and indeed the Trump White House, Donald Trump Jr. But the events planned for Sydney, Brisbane and Melbourne have been postponed. Organisers say his visa was approved only 24 hours before he was due to get on a plane. Andrew Cooper is the founder of the Conservative Political Action Conference Australia.
The government made sure that they delayed the issuing of that visa as long as they could, forcing the promoter to postpone.
Promoters Turning Point Australia say 8,000 tickets had been sold, ranging in price from $89 to $2,500 for a private dinner. Andrew Cooper is preparing for his own conference in August.
We constantly have trouble getting our speakers to come in from overseas, and it's the same thing, they delay. For example, Nigel Farage last year, he got issued his visa the day before he was due to fly out. It's just very disappointing. Yeah, they're lodged in plenty of time and they take 3-4 times the recommended time to be processed, and invariably they expose people like us to risk.
The government says Donald Trump Jr.'s visa was approved and denies the application was treated differently. In a now deleted series of tweets, Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neill suggested the trip was cancelled to hide poor ticket sales.
Donald Trump Jr. has been given a visa to come to Australia. He didn't get cancelled. He's just a big baby who isn't very popular.
A few hours later, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was more restrained in his response.
Donald Trump Jr.'s visa was dealt with in the normal way.
and like anyone else, he was entitled to come here. The deferral of his travel is a matter for him.
There's no doubt Donald Trump's firstborn son is a controversial figure. He promoted misinformation during the height of the COVID pandemic and supports many of his father's inflammatory views. An online petition calling for him to be banned from the country has 22,000 signatures. But it's not that easy to get denied entry into Australia. Menashe Rasama is an associate at Estrin Saul Immigration Lawyers.
The main reason someone may not have their visa approved on character grounds is because they don't meet the character test. Now, the character test is something that the Australian government put in place to exclude people who have either a substantial criminal record or persons that they suspect will act in criminal activity. In some circumstances, someone may not pass the character test because it may lead to harm in the Australian community or disruption to the Australian community.
Some celebrities to be banned from Australia include boxer Floyd Mayweather Jr. for a history of domestic violence and far-right activist Gavin McInnes. But it's a short list. Donald Trump Jr. has no known criminal record, so lawyer Menashe Rasama says he would be unlikely to meet the criteria for a visa denial.
When a famous person gets refused on character grounds, it's probably likely that there is some information that is known to the public about previous offending. The department has to do its own assessment on whether they think that offending may occur in Australia.
His father, Donald Trump, remains one of the frontrunners for the Republican presidential nomination in 2024.
In Geneva, dozens of humanoid robots have been showing off their skills at the start of a UN summit on artificial intelligence. The summit, hosted by the United Nations International Telecommunications Union, will focus on how AI can be used to make life easier and better. But amid concerns that new technology is racing ahead, the summit will also discuss rules for its use. The BBC's Imogen Folks filed this report from Switzerland.
Hi there. My name is Nadine and I'm a humanoid social robot from the University of Geneva.
Meet Nadine, the robot designed for social care.
My purpose in life is to help people by providing them with companionship.
She's the brainchild of Geneva professor Nadia Talman, who has already tested her out in homes for the elderly in Singapore.
People were very happy. They went by themselves to talk to Nadine. They were saying, "You are my only friend." They explained all the stories. They cannot talk to somebody else. They came to her to play bingo. So it was very positive. So in this case, I think they are very useful.
Could Nadine be our future? The UN's International Telecommunications Union believes this kind of artificial intelligence could and should be harnessed for the benefit of humanity, not just in social care, but in rapid disease diagnosis, even in tackling climate change. But there are concerns too. That's why Peggy Hicks of the UN's Human Rights Office is at the summit too.
There are real problems with its ability to accelerate disinformation and enhance bias. So we could see ourselves going down the same pathway that we did on social media, which would be really, regrettable, given that we now know much more about how to avoid it. But we also have to look at the impacts on the world of work and make sure we're training up people to do jobs that may get replaced. But we also have to look at those longer-term consequences in areas like lethal weapons and things where there really are real, important, almost existential risks to some of these technologies.
With Wimbledon well underway in London, off-court a panel of experts has been discussing the carbon footprint of tennis. Professional players can fly nearly 100,000 kilometres a year. The BBC's tennis correspondent Russell Fuller has more on what the men's ATP Tour has been doing.
They've recently launched a new carbon app, which is for the players to potentially be competitive and try and cut down their emissions every year. The long-term ambition is to inspire greener travel throughout the tour. Cameron Norrie's put his name to it, Dominic Thiem, Andrei Rublev, also Emil Rusevori of Finland.
For me, it was just a very cool idea, very easy to use, and just bring the awareness around the world, make some people maybe think twice what they do. For us, everybody here, they're so competitive, they want to win. Doesn't matter if it's a card game or whatever it is, so I think it'll bring some healthy competition.
They're going to monitor their emissions via